Yo, have you ever wanted to change your skin?
Downloadable content. The latest and greatest way to serve customers either the best and most refined version of your game, or get customers to pay 75 cents out of their living adult wages for a skeleton.
Strip Club Incorporated.
Good job.
Nintendo was actually one of the last companies to start using DLC in their games. The president, when DLC first started becoming common, Satoru Iwata, was clearly very hesitant about it, stating in interviews that he didn't want players to feel cheated or deceived by their DLC. This philosophy would affect Nintendo's early DLC. Iwata saw some games having a large chunk of a game's content being locked behind paid DLC and didn't want Nintendo to reach that same point with their DLC. This would cause Nintendo's first journey into DLC and New Super Mario Bros. 2 to become very limited. New Super Bro 2 was the third installment in the New Super Mario Bros. Series. It features not only the human drive to accrue as much wealth as you possibly can, whether or not you even need it, but also extra level packs. They would make 10 packs over the course of 3 months, costing about $2.50 each, bringing the overall total to about $25. With each pack containing about 3 levels, it was 30 levels for $25, which is a bit overpriced. But since it was only $2.50 a pack, it did kind of fool you if you were only buying them one at a time, and by the time you realized you had lost $25, you were already picking up some extra shifts.
Yeah, I'll wear the bikini.
Each level's quality was mixed. While some of them would be easy and boring, there were some levels that were genuine challenges that were fun to have in a new Soup game since they're not generally super hard. But you could tell this was Nintendo just starting paid DLC and they hadn't quite figured out pricing and style of content they wanted to deliver. But after experimenting with NSMB 2, they figured out what they were missing and they repackaged it into quite the package with New Super Luigi U. New Super Luigi U was Nintendo's first real full DLC. It took the original game, New Super Mario Bros. U, and made an entirely new game with a completely new set of levels featuring different physics, a generally higher difficulty, and a shorter level, and fucking nabbit. But it all only costs $20, which is an insanely good deal. It's cheaper than NSMB 2's DLC and contains more levels and even an extra character, even if he is the worst. They also changed the physics to be more slippery and jump higher to match Luigi's physics in games like Super Mario Bros. 2 Not New. This was a little controversial because Luigi's oiled up shoes made it difficult to come to a stop while running, making precision platforming more difficult, but many were able to excuse it, not only because they were imagining Luigi's feet lather than oil, but because it encouraged going through these shorter levels incredibly quickly. It was overall a success, and Nintendo would be ready to go into the world of DLC by completely subverting the system. Rusty's Real Deal Baseball is about exploiting a broken man's terrible life situation so you can get his goods for cheaper.
Don't need the minimum wage.
Rusty's Real Deal Baseball is free to download, but just downloading it will only get you so far. When you first download the game, you'll have access to a demo of a minigame, but that's it. If you want to get all of the content the game has to offer, you'll have to head over to Rusty. Rusty is a divorced dog with a failing baseball shop and 10 kids for which he's the only caretaker of. He decides to start selling baseball video games at his baseball shop to help drum up interest in his shop. The player, seeing an opportunity, decides to haggle with Rusty to get the games for a cheaper price. This creates the interesting approach to DLC that this game has. These minigames you're buying from Rusty cost real money, and while they all start at $4, you can haggle all of them down to under $2. The price you have to pay is based on your performance in haggling with Rusty and exploiting his failing life to your benefit. It's a weird system and probably wouldn't work if they were to do it again, but it's interesting to play around with at least once and was well received at the time. It's just one of those times when Nintendo went completely off the rails and came up with an idea that actually worked. However, this was the idea they had the year before, so you win some, you lose some. And in one of the few successful attempts to justify this, we got what might be the most captivating DLC of all time. Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and whatever the fuck was Nintendo's biggest DLC yet, giving a chance for even more fighters to join the already legendary roster. Shortly before the whatever the fuck version came out, they announced that they would be releasing DLC fighters, stages, and Mii Fighter costumes for the game. This was obviously very exciting, having a second chance to get your favorite characters in the game and even get some stages and Mii Fighter costumes along with it. And while some decisions with the DLC were criticized, it was generally exciting the whole way through. And there's only so much complaining you can do about hot men. After the slightly overpriced NSMB 2, Nintendo just seemed to understand what warranted a good DLC. Mario Kart would add 16 new tracks and 6 new characters for an amazing deal. Pikmin 3 added really great new challenges at incredibly cheap prices. Hyrule Warriors 10xing the game size with hundreds of new challenges, tons of new characters, and new weapons with unique playstyles for old characters at a lower price than the game itself. Fire Emblem Awakening charging $3 for a single mission. Wait a minute. Fire Emblem Awakening, a game intended to be the death of the series, decided it was going to take every last dollar from its players. 25 missions ranging from $2.50 to $3 for a total of $71. A completely absurd price, especially since the base game was $40 and had 25 missions. I'm sure these missions were fun, but who's gonna want to pay $71 on top of a $40 game? This did admittedly release in Japan before NSMB 2 was released, so Nintendo was still trying to figure out what they wanted to do, but did nobody even try to calculate the price of the DLC next to the price of the game? I guess it's the same fan base they gave a gacha game and it immediately became Nintendo's highest grossing mobile game of all time. I'm gonna need another shift. But this is still so obviously a terrible deal. But it's the only notable failure out of many successes throughout the whole 3DS and whatever the fuck generation, which is obviously an overall win. Nintendo understood what they needed for a good DLC and would consistently replicate it. But Nintendo, deciding they didn't want to be a failing company anymore, decided to make their best-selling home console. The Nintendo Switch would release, and Nintendo would want to take full advantage of their new fan base by giving them broken controllers. They would also release DLC for many of their new, incredibly successful Switch games. Breath of the Wild would be the first game to be receiving DLC, but for some reason, fans were much more wary of this DLC than others. This DLC, while adding 2 extra full-scale challenges in the Trial of the Sword and Champion's Ballad, would still notably hold back some basic quality of life changes with the Travel Medallion, Hero's Path, and Ancient Horse Armor. The Travel Medallion and Horse Armor just made the world easier to traverse, with the ability to set fast travel locations and the ability to call your horse anywhere. And the Hero's Path mode would just show you where you've been already. All of these were really odd to hold back for DLC. They aren't really adding to the game, they're just making the game better to play. That sort of stuff isn't DLC material. They should be in the base game, or worst case, free DLC. This was out of character because up to this point, there wasn't anything in their DLC like this. This was ultimately overshadowed by all of the great games Nintendo was releasing at the time, and everyone had pretty much forgotten about it by the time Nintendo added boobs to the console. And after this, Nintendo would end up creating some of the best DLC they would ever create. Splatoon 2, Octopath Traveler, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Torna the Golden Best Boy are 2 of the greatest downloadable content packs I've ever seen. Octo Expansion created a single-player campaign often considered to be the best in the series, and Torna the Golden Country created a whole new campaign with new combat, new characters, and the same boobs. Octo Expansion is a campaign where you play as the Octolings, a previous enemy in the series, and you complete various challenges. Each challenge is interesting and has varying difficulties with varying rewards. It's arguably the greatest thing Splatoon has ever done. It's either this or making spraying ink an acceptable phrase in Nintendo discussion. Torna the Golden Country is essentially an entire other game that just happens to come with DLC for Xenoblade Chronicles 2. This DLC got so big that they decided to package it as its own game. But the DLC for Xenoblade 2 still comes with it. This was originally going to be a portion of the story in the base game, where we flash back to what happened 500 years before the events of the game. But it ended up not making sense within the story, so instead of scrapping it, they expanded it and made it a prequel. They've even completely overhauled the combat to make it much more accessible. It is beyond a good deal and one of the best DLC ever made for a game. Nintendo would continue the DLC train with Smash Ultimate coming back swinging even harder than Smash 4, and players would get even harder than Smash 4. Mario Kart would double the size of its track roster. Fire Emblem, Animal Crossing, Hyrule Warriors, Mario Rabbids, Pokemon, Captain fucking Toad all got DLC that was really meaty or at least priced fair for the amount of content. Nintendo was doing a good job of extrapolating our money from us and making it feel fair, and some of us were struggling to keep up.
You're not ugly. Men want you.
But from seemingly nowhere, a previous hero of DLC would return to be a dick. Luigi's Mansion 3 is a good game that was a good candidate for DLC. It could have had some extra floors or anything else to expand the gameplay. But it had these side modes of Scarescraper and Scream Park. Scarescraper is a fully fledged multiplayer mode where you work together to defeat ghosts. Scream Park is certifiably a side mode. It features a few minor minigames, namely the regular game, Luigi But in Water, and Luigi with Artillery. The idea of Scarescraper receiving DLC is really interesting. You could have new abilities, new challenges, maybe even new characters, but they only added some themes and costumes, so nothing of actual substance. But Scream Park was the only mode to receive genuine DLC, and all they did was add 6 minigames. They were just Luigi Dodgeball, Luigi But Electric, Luigi in Water with Wood, Luigi But Slipperier, Luigi But Dirty, and Luigi in Water but with different context. It was mostly ignored by most people, but it baffles me that they thought this was okay to sell. And I think this marked a shift in Nintendo's philosophy around how they treat DLC. First of all, they're more okay with a major portion of DLC just being skins. Second, they realize that they don't need to put as much work into DLC as they think they do. I imagine the Luigi's Mansion DLC probably made some profit because it clearly didn't take a lot of work to develop. I think then they started prioritizing making money, because the Smash DLC would release some completely busted characters, incentivizing people to buy it if they wanted to keep up. To be fair, this isn't the first time they did this, but the second round of DLC fighters for Ultimate definitely felt more powerful than the first. And Mario Kart's DLC would contain mostly recycled content. Not that any of these are necessarily bad deals, but they seem to start focusing on profit more and more. And in the year 2023, it's kind of starting to feel like they're just pushing stuff out. Fire Emblem Engage is living off of boobs right now, and in comparison to Three Houses DLC, it is significantly less content. We haven't seen the story expansion yet, to be fair, but the first few packs are much less than Three Houses content. Xenoblade did keep up with the new campaign, but it didn't really rework the combat in the same way. It just took away options and just added effects to existing ones. And Splatoon is adding Inkopolis, the main hub from the first game, back to Splatoon 3. This naturally begs the question, what does that mean? And Nintendo just never answered and then released the DLC. It's completely pointless as far as I can tell. To be fair, I didn't get enough tips to buy this one, but I'm pretty sure this is completely superfluous. It will be coming with some kind of single-player campaign later that could justify the price, but why did they add this? It accomplishes nothing other than incentivize pre-ordering the future campaign a year ahead of time. These DLC could paint the beginning of a pattern. Most of these DLCs aren't necessarily bad, other than the Sploon example, but they clearly have less thought and effort put into them. I think that's because Nintendo is starting to see less value in high-quality DLC, and it's starting to show. Obviously, they've never directly stated this, but it seems Nintendo is starting to see DLC as more of a quick buck than anything else. This is just the beginning of a potential pattern, and it could just as easily be an off couple of years, but I think Nintendo is going to start releasing more DLC that nobody is going to care about.
Hopefully this pattern doesn't continue. And there's really no real evidence that Nintendo is thinking this way, so maybe we have nothing to worry about. But either way, if Nintendo keeps releasing DLC, you're gonna have to promise to tip well.